Patrick Shields in the morning.
Party all the time is this song we're listening to right now. Was there a party at the Manoogian Mansion in 2002 with Mike Cox? Can you imagine what a scene that must have been with Kwame Kilpatrick and Mike Cox and Mrs. Kilpatrick coming busting it up? You got motorcycle gangs outside keeping the security. It's stuff right out of a Dutch Leonard movie, isn't it? Or novel. 10 minutes before the hour, we want to give Andy Hetzel a chance here because we mentioned that there are some reforms that are coming very quickly in terms of health care, and you'll want to know about them. Blue Cross Blue Shield of Michigan already does, obviously. What's on the immediate horizon when it comes to the health care change?
I appreciate you extending my time, Michael. Blue Cross is about 2 months ahead of schedule in implementing some of the first reforms that are required by the federal health care reform law. We're ahead because, very plainly, we didn't practice these business practices anyway. But for all employers who offer health care coverage, on September 23rd of this year, there will be a number of changes, including they will extend dependent coverage up to age 26. So if you have a young dependent in your family up to age 26, you can enroll that dependent in your group plan. It removes lifetime annual dollar limits from coverage, so there will be no maximum limit to your health care coverage. If you get real sick, you can count on your health care to be there for you. It removes pre-existing condition exclusions for children up to age 19. So if you have a child with a pre-existing condition and they come into coverage with that condition, you'll no longer have a waiting period for that child. The law prohibits rescissions, which is dropping people from health insurance coverage because their health condition changes during the coverage period. Blue Cross didn't do that anyway, but that's a good change that affects all the other insurers. And finally, it clarifies emergency services, which means that if you want to access an emergency room and that ER is not in the hospital network for your coverage, you can access it at in-network rates for your coverage. So these are all good changes, and Blue Cross is implementing them about 2 months ahead of schedule.
They sound very sensible to me because if you're in an emergency situation, the last thing you want to do is flip through a book and figure out what the nearest hospital that's in your network is, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, that's fair.
It really does protect people, but employers that offer coverage and people who are covered by employer plans need to be aware of these changes. We have a website, Michael. It's bcbsm.com/healthreform. Anybody in Michigan, not just Blue Cross members, but anybody can access that and find out the types of changes that will be impacting them.
I'll never forget when my son Harrison I think he was 2 years old. He slipped in the living room and hit his head on a marble coffee table. And, man, I as soon as his head hit the table, I was up, scooped him up. It was all one continuous motion. Right out to the driveway, right into the car, and straight to the nearest hospital, which I think was a Henry Ford hospital. And I never for a second thought about, where am I going to take him, and sure enough, we ended up with a gigantic bill because of it. But, so in that situation, this would be alleviated. Thank you very much, Andy Hetzel, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you, Michael. Good spending time with you.
bcbsm.com is where you can find out more about these immediate changes. And, it's good for young people, too. They'll be covered all the way up to age 26 under their parents' insurance while they get their lives in order and have their gap year in Europe and whatever else young people do.
Well, and Michael Patrick, and I got to jump in here, all those great things that Andy just described that you called common sense reforms, all of them were opposed unanimously by every Republican in the Congress, and they're the kind of things that Mike Cox would like to repeal. So let's be very conscious here of all
he
these
wants us to opt out of it.
That's why he filed that lawsuit. Let's be very conscious here of all these great things that are going on in health care and where the Republican Party stands. They want to get rid of all of it.
President Obama is going to appear on The View, apparently. That should be very interesting to see. And he's coming to Detroit this week. Will you be with the president?
No. These visits that he's been making, he was, Kalamazoo, Ann Arbor, Holland recently, are all official government visits. There's no political element to it. There'll be plenty of times. I've met the president before. There'll be plenty of times for me to see him in a political context. I'm just glad he's coming back. He's been terrific.
Fourth time now.
He's been terrific for us here in Michigan. And you talked about this morning. I know earlier with Andy Dillon and others. I mean, he basically rescued, at great political peril to himself, 2 of our 3 automakers here in Michigan. This state would be in much, much worse condition without what he's done. The Recovery Act has pumped billions of dollars into our economy. You just talked about health care reform. So I'm glad and I'm happy when we ever had the president here. He's been really good for us here in Michigan in sharp contrast to George Bush.
Speaking of Andy Dillon, what do you make of Bill Ballinger saying that he thinks that Virg Bernero is going to win the nomination, that people are running in droves away from Speaker Dillon?
Again, neutral in the primary, Michael Patrick, you know that. Lots of predictions, lots of pundits are making predictions, and a week from today we'll know the voters' final verdict on all of that.
Is the toughest primary, congressionally speaking, well, really one of the only ones on the Democratic side, the Carolyn Kilpatrick?
On the congressional side, yes.
Cheeks, they call her?
Carolyn
Detroit?
Cheeks Kilpatrick, Congresswoman from Detroit.
She's in a fight of her life, isn't she?
It appears to be a tough primary for her. She had one 2 years ago and survived. We'll see what happens this time.
There was a debate, I guess, yesterday, and she said that her record should be judged, not her son's record. She's got to put a little distance between herself and Kwame.
I think that's standard. Every elected official should be held to their record, not the record of a relative or somebody that they're not responsible for.
We'll talk again before the primary. Thank you very much for being with us.
Glad to be here.
Mark Brewer, chairman of the Michigan Democratic Party. Michael Patrick Shields, heard on radio stations all across the state, seen on YouTube at MPS in the morning, and on television. Viewers, we're going to say goodbye to you right now. Radio listeners, stay right where you are. More of this Tuesday morning. As soon as we get back, it's Michael Patrick Shields.
Yes, and all the muchachas, they call me Big Papa. When I throw pesos their way. Adios and via con Dios. A long way from GA. Someone do me a favor and pour me some Jaeger, and I'll grab my guitar and play.